When people talk about the golden age of rock, names like Joe Walsh and Stevie Nicks almost always rise to the top. Both of them lived at the center of chaos, love, heartbreak, and music that has outlasted every storm. Their paths crossing was no accident. It was fate, and fans would only learn years later just how deep that story really went. Joe Walsh, the wild and unpredictable guitarist of the Eagles, was known for living life at full speed. Stevie Nicks, the voice of Fleetwood Mac, was every bit his equal in spirit, beauty, and intensity. When they came together, the connection wasn't just a fling. It was a collision of two forces who understood each other in ways nobody else could. Most people remember Stevie's great romances with Lindsey Buckingham or Don Henley. But what many fans don't realize is that Joe Walsh was, in Stevie's own words, the true love of her life. That's not gossip. That's a confession Stevie herself made years later, long after the fire had cooled, long after the chaos of their years together had passed. Walsh has admitted that Stevie saved him in ways nobody else could. At a time when he was spiraling out of control, she became his anchor. And yet, the same fire that held them together also burned them apart. Their story was never meant to be a happy fairy tale. It was a love written in the margins of rock history, waiting for the world to finally hear it. When Joe Walsh talks about Stevie now, there's no bitterness in his voice. There's pain, yes, but also a kind of gratitude. He doesn't paint their story as one of failure. Instead, he sees it as a moment of truth, a reminder that even in the chaos of stardom, real love is possible, even if it doesn't last forever. Stevie, on her part, has always kept Joe's name close to her heart. In interviews, she has called him the one. Not Lindsey, not Don, not anyone else. Joe Walsh was the man she loved more deeply than anyone. And when fans hear that, it changes everything they thought they knew about the rock world's most famous witchy woman. The shock isn't just that they were together. The shock is how deeply they loved, and how much they lost. Joe once revealed a moment that forever tied him to Stevie. He told the story of losing his young daughter in a tragic accident, a pain so unbearable that he could barely go on. And it was Stevie who pulled him back from the edge. She was the one who gave him the strength to keep living when the darkness was too much. Fans were stunned when Walsh admitted that Stevie carried him through that grief. It wasn't publicized, it wasn't written in magazines, it wasn't part of the rock gossip. It was their private world, their shared wound, and their hidden bond. That moment turned their love into something bigger than music. It became about survival, about holding on when everything else was falling apart. For years, the love between Joe Walsh and Stevie Nicks was like a ghost in rock history. It was whispered about in circles of fans but never truly told. That all changed when Joe began to speak openly. Fans who thought they had Stevie figured out were blindsided. They had built her story around Fleetwood Mac's chaos, especially her famous connection to Lindsey Buckingham. But Joe's name changed everything. The shock came from the way Stevie described him. She didn't call Joe a fling or a passing chapter. She called him the love of her life. It wasn't Lindsey, it wasn't Don Henley. It was Joe Walsh. For die-hard Fleetwood Mac fans, this turned the mythology upside down. Songs that were once thought to be about Lindsey suddenly took on new meaning. People began to wonder if Joe was hidden in Stevie's lyrics. And the more fans dug, the more they saw clues. Lines of longing, fragments of heartbreak, images of roads, cars, and distance, pieces that fit Joe's life. It was as though he had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. But Joe's own confessions hit even harder. He admitted that Stevie was his lifeline when he lost his young daughter. The grief had been so unbearable that he could barely go on. Stevie was the one who held him together. That revelation shook fans deeply. Behind the rock star image was a father broken by tragedy, and a woman who loved him enough to carry his pain. It was a side of both legends few had ever seen. What stunned people even more was Joe's honesty about why their love ended. He didn't say it faded. He didn't say it soured. He said he walked away because he feared his addictions would destroy her. That kind of sacrifice is rare in rock and roll. Most stories are about ego, betrayal, and chaos. But Joe's story was about love so deep that he gave it up to save her. Fans didn't know how to process it. The reaction was explosive. Across forums, social media, and fan groups, people shared their shock. They posted old pictures of Joe and Stevie, suddenly loaded with meaning. Many fans felt heartbreak. They imagined what could have been if Joe had been sober, if the timing had been right. They wished the two had grown old together. Others admired the story, seeing beauty in the sacrifice. They called it one of rock's greatest hidden romances, a love that proved even legends can be fragile and selfless. Joe's voice when he spoke about Stevie was filled with regret but also tenderness. He didn't sound bitter. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a man who knew he had lost something priceless. That tone hit fans hard. It was rare to hear a rock star strip away the myth and speak like a human being, broken and vulnerable. It made the story real. Stevie's honesty carried the same force. Even in her later years, when asked about the great loves of her life, she didn't hesitate. She named Joe. She never wavered. That consistency stunned fans. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't a romantic rewrite. It was truth. Even decades later, he was still the one. For fans, it felt like a hidden novel within rock history. A story of two icons who found each other, saved each other, and lost each other, all while the world focused on other scandals. The story also revealed the cost of fame. Stevie and Joe had lives millions envied, yet they carried pain and demons that money or talent couldn't erase. Their love showed how fragile even legends could be. Fans began to revisit their music. Some swore they heard Joe's presence in Stevie's solo songs. Others claimed her longing on stage carried echoes of him. The shock turned into fascination. Walsh himself spoke of Stevie with humility. He didn't brag. He didn't sensationalize. He simply admitted she was the one who mattered most. That honesty was what shook people to their core. It made fans realize that behind the fame, there was just a man and a woman who loved and lost, just like anyone else. And in that, they became more human than ever. What hit hardest was the idea of timing. If Joe had been sober, if their lives had been calmer, if fame hadn't been so brutal, maybe they could have lasted. That what if haunted fans. Some even imagined how music history would have changed. Could Joe and Stevie have written together? Could they have created an album born of their love? Fans debated endlessly. But the truth remained the same. Joe left to save her. Stevie never stopped loving him. And the world only found out decades later, in a wave of shocking revelations. The story spread far beyond fan circles. Magazines picked it up, podcasts discussed it, and younger fans discovered it for the first time. It became a reminder that rock history still has secrets to tell. For Stevie, speaking about Joe was never just nostalgia. It was about honoring the love that shaped her. She admitted that after him, no one ever compared. That honesty floored fans. For Joe, the regret lingered. He admitted he would never forget her, never stop being grateful. He carried her memory like a scar, a reminder of what love could be and what it cost. The shocking truth resonated because it was so different from the usual rock and roll tales. This wasn't about scandal or betrayal. It was about love, loss, and sacrifice. Fans realized that even legends can't always control their destiny. Sometimes love is real, but the world around it is too chaotic to let it survive. That's what made the story unforgettable. The more people learned, the more they saw Joe and Stevie not as icons, but as humans. They were fragile, vulnerable, and just as haunted by love as anyone else. And that shock has lingered. To this day, when Stevie's fans hear her speak of the one, they know it means Joe Walsh. It's a truth that will always redefine her story. Because in the end, Joe Walsh's revelation didn't just shock fans. It gave them a glimpse of the truth behind the myths. And it proved that the greatest love stories are sometimes the ones we almost never hear. Joe Walsh and Stevie Nicks will forever be tied together in that truth. A love hidden for decades, only revealed when the time was right. A love that shocked the world, but also made it believe. Because when Joe spoke, and when Stevie agreed, fans finally understood, this was no myth, no rumor, no gossip. It was the realest love of all. That revelation left fans heartbroken. The idea that Walsh gave up the love of his life, not because he stopped loving her, but because he loved her too much to let her fall with him. That's the kind of story that feels almost too tragic to be true. But in the world of rock and roll, truth is always stranger, and more painful, than fiction. To this day, when Walsh speaks about Stevie, there's a softness in his words that cuts through the rough edges of his image. He doesn't talk about her like a past fling. He talks about her like someone who changed him forever. And Stevie, even decades later, still carries his memory like a hidden flame. For fans, the shock isn't just about learning they were together. It's about realizing that behind the stage lights, the fame, and the chaos, two of the greatest legends of rock shared a love story that was as real and raw as any. It was messy, it was tragic, but it was true. And when Walsh finally opened up, the world understood why Stevie has always said he was the one. The untold story of Joe Walsh and Stevie Nicks is more than just a rock romance. It's a reminder of the human side of legends. It shows us that even the brightest stars can fall in love, lose everything, and still carry those scars for life. And it proves that sometimes the most shocking truths are the ones hidden in plain sight, waiting to be told by the very people who live them.